Hey everyone, welcome to another tutorial for the Dynamic Surface Navigation plugin for Unreal Engine. In today's tutorial we're going to be going over the properties, taking a deep dive into the properties of the Grid Builder, the Surface Nav Grid Builder. So let's go ahead and get into it. So I've already got a scene here, and I'm going to start with the general category. We've got the max distance from player for generation, and that is the maximum distance that the navigation is going to generate from the player. Now you also have these two here, the new near block generation radius and the far block generation radius. So near refers to, near and far refer to how close the player is to the invoker. So when the player is near an invoker, its block generation radius is going to be this far. And when the player is far from the invoker, the block generation radius, navigation generation radius, is going to be, it says 0, but there is a minimum. It's 1.5x the block size, which is down here, which we'll get to. So as the player gets closer to the invoker, it'll gradually get closer and closer. The navigation will gradually generate further and further out until it gets to this distance from the invoker. As the player gets further away from the invoker, the navigation generation radius will get smaller and smaller until it gets to the minimum specified here, or the minimum 1.5 the block size. Now if you don't want the size to change if the player is in range, then you can set these two values at the exact same thing, and that'll just force it to always be and for navigation to always generate at this radius, assuming it's within the distance of the player. Now even if a block, navigation block, is within this range of the invoker, if it's beyond this distance, if that block is beyond this distance from the player, it still won't generate. Alright, so now let me go ahead and show you this in action. So I've got the distance from player for generation set pretty high, 10,000, which I think that's the default. And then near block generation radius set to 6,000. So as I'm further back, the generation radius, there should be fewer blocks, navigation blocks being built around the invokers, which in each one of the AI here have an invoker in them. So I'm just going to go ahead and run this now. And I want to show collision so we can see those navigation blocks being generated. And see, those are not 6 blocks, each block's 1,000. So we should have 6 blocks out, which we don't, so because of the distance that we are from the invokers. So I'm going to walk towards them and we'll see more blocks getting generated around them. And there's another guy way out there that we're too far away from for it to generate navigation blocks around it. So I'll just walk towards them. We'll see more and more get generated as we get closer. And then when I walk away, as soon as the cleanup timer runs, we should see these blocks go back down. So sometimes the collision does not refresh when it's been after it's removed. So I'm just going to toggle it off and then toggle it back on, so we can see that the collision, the nav blocks, that there are now fewer of them. So now I'm going to go ahead and set the far block generation radius the same as the near block generation radius, so you can see that in action as well. Let's go ahead and run this, and again I'm going to show collision, and so now all of the blocks are being, navigation blocks are being generated. So even if I'm right at the edge of that distance, as long as the invoker is within range of the player, it's going to generate all of the navigation blocks in this scenario. And the next setting I want to talk about is flat world. If you're building a flat world, you don't need to worry about this because it's checked by default. But if you're working on a planet or asteroid, some other type of gravity object, then you'll want to uncheck this. And this has nothing to do with gravity. This setting, when used with the Surface Nav Planet component on planet actors, it allows the plugin to determine what the ground normal at a given location relative to the planet the pawn is on. And when this setting is unchecked, it will, and you don't set a planet for the pawn, it will automatically use the closest planet actor to the pawn as the planet it's on. Now, if you're not doing anything with angle limits for your pawns in the Surface Nav movement controllers, or sorry, Surface Nav movement component, then this setting really is not going to help you. Or I should say it won't really do anything if you're not using the angle limits. And the next category I want to talk about is the block config. For the most part, you probably won't need to mess with the settings in this category. I had actually thought about hiding some of these, but went ahead and decided to leave them in just in case someone wanted to tweak these. The block size just refers to the size of that block I was showing you earlier. That's the navigation block. And then clean block interval. That's the interval that runs to clean up the blocks. If, say, a navigation block was generated and then the player got beyond the distance for navigation generation for that block, it wouldn't get cleaned up until that interval ran. And then we've got max pool size, and so that's the size of the navigation block pool. And for the most part, 10,000 should be okay. But if you've got a lot of navigation that you want to generate all at the same time, then you may need to increase this so you're not constantly exhausting it. Because it's going to be more expensive if you exhaust it and have to dynamically spawn actors. And then on the initial block pool size, that one is just how many it warms up with, basically. How many navigation block instances it'll create when it loads. Now you can play with this number, any of these numbers, to kind of tweak how quickly it loads and generates the navigation. The grid point distance, that's basically the resolution of your navigation points. The smaller this number, the heavier cost that's going to be both generating the navigation as well as pathfinding. If this number is too big, that's going to create a different issue, because when the pawn is pathfinding, let's say around a corner, when this number is really large, potential for the points to be really far away from the corner means it's trying to navigate through the corner. So you don't want this number to get too big unless you have specific design purposes in mind that benefit from it being larger. 80 typically works pretty good in what I've found. Okay, and so moving on to the next category, AI. And so here we've got the max pathing iterations. That's just how many loops, right? Loop iterations you want to allow when an AI is attempting to find a path to a location or an actor. And 1,000, that's works okay for a lot of cases. But if you have an instance where an AI is, say, on the ceiling and would have to pathfind further away from its target to get to a wall, that would then take it to the floor, that could get to its target, 1,000 may not be enough. You may have to start increasing that. And I can actually show y'all here in a moment issues with it being too low. Now, you don't, on the flip side, you don't want it to be too high, because it could really eat into your frame time. And so the next one, max path requests per tick. Basically, that's how many pathing requests can happen per tick. So if you have two AI that make a request during the same tick, the first one with this setting, with one, the first one is going to succeed and the next one is going to fail and need to retry on another frame. Again, you don't want this to be too high. If you leave the max pathing iterations at 1,000, you could probably get a few path requests in, but I kind of like leaving it here because it distributes the load a little better. So the next one, observed path tick interval. So that's how often it will process requests for repaths, basically. So if the player moves, the pawn wants to repath to its new location, it'll do it every, right now, 0.2 seconds. And now I want to throw together a quick little demo of to demonstrate the max pathing iterations. So when you would need to increase that. So let me do that real quick and then I will be back. Okay, I am back, and so what I've done here is just created some blocks, stretched them out, so I have a roof and a wall that are connected to the floor. And I went ahead and set the far block generation radius to 6,000 just to make sure it always has enough navigation around it to fully get to me. And right now I have the max pathing iterations to 1,000. I know for sure this isn't going to be enough because it's having to go pretty far away from me to find the wall to come down. It's trying every other possibility before it gets down there. So if we run this, and it kicks in, it's going to walk up to me because this is the closest spot it can pathfind to me right now. Now I am going to bump this up. Let's go to 8,000. And now let's play. And so with that increased iterations, it can now properly pathfind to a point that's closer to me or next to me. Yeah, I'm not going to make y'all sit through the whole thing. We made it through the AI category. The next one is going to be advanced. And this one, for the most part, just leave this one alone. This one I had to implement because there were times when it was not detecting surfaces, most likely due to rounding errors. And so I created this that extends those traces out ever so slightly. And if you make this number too big, it can start breaking the navigation. So I recommend leaving this alone unless you absolutely have to change it. Now the next category is in debug. So show debug nav points during build. So if we check this and run it, you're going to see all the navigation build, and if anything changes, you'll also see the areas that change get the navigation built on them again as well. And so just to show y'all that setting working when you make changes, let's go ahead and play. Let the initial build happen. And now I'm going to go move this thing around, and so you'll see all the navigation that gets affected when this moves. Okay, so now let's take a look at the show debug AI paths. And what this is going to do is do dotted lines of the path that the AI are taking. And so you'll see green for the start and the red for the end. And you see pathing for those that are wandering over there. Alright, so the last category for the grid builder is going to be pathfinding. And here we have some different options related to the dynamic expense modifiers. But first, let's cover this one down here. Delay before pathfinding allowed. So all that's going to do is put a certain amount of time before any pathing is allowed when the level loads. So if I make this 30 seconds, none of the AI are going to be able to pathfind until 30 seconds after the level loads. And you may want to do that for, make sure everything's loaded in. If you have anything like procedurally generating, you could do a delay here. There's other ways you could pause it to on your own. Okay, so now let's take a look at these three properties here. And so here we've got the max expense modifier. That one is the maximum dynamic modifier that can be built up to. You don't want to make this so high that the AI end up wandering away from their target. This is kind of a number you'll need to play with, just like all of these numbers. But the lower it is, the less it will prevent them from lining up. The higher it is, the more it'll prevent them from lining up if a group is pathfinding to the same target. I found these numbers work pretty well, but you may need to lower or raise it depending on what you're going for. The expense modifier up step. This is just how quickly it increases the expense modifier up to this maximum. And so this is just adding on every time an AI uses the same point in their pathing. And then the expense modifier down step, that's just how much is subtracted from the dynamic expense modifier as AI consider a point for pathing, but choose not to use it. And this will get it down eventually to 0. It won't go below 0, the dynamic expense modifier. So let me show you. You can just zero these out. And then I'm going to set this up to have all the AI nearby, near each other. And then I'll be back. Okay, I'm back. And so I set these guys up, 10 of them, and we still have all these dynamic expense modifiers properties set to 0. And I also made all of these spider bots aggressive to make sure they always target me so we can see them pathing to the same location. So let's see how this looks once they kick in. There we go. And see, they're all kind of taking a similar path now, because that's the least expensive path. Now if I turn, the ones out there are going to turn, but eventually they'll start lining up again. Now if I make this, let's reset it, just so you can see it at its default. Run it again. And so now they're spreading out a bit more. They're not always taking the same path. And they'll even walk around me sometimes, or around the group, like that one is. Now, we can go further with this. Let's make this really high. Let's make it 1200. And we'll increase, let's say, by 400 each time, decrease by 200. Why not? So now let's see this with those numbers cranked up a bit. So they're spreading out a bit more. Now also for the grid builder, if you're going to use it with a world partition level, then you need to make sure is spatially loaded is unchecked, because we need this one to be persistent. And I've had this not take my setting before. There we go. And once you do that, it will always be loaded. It'll be able to handle the navigation. Because if this gets unloaded and then reloaded, it causes problems. So you definitely don't want that to be part of something that area that gets unloaded. Now, if you are using level streaming, you want to make sure that the grid builder is not in any of your streaming levels. It needs to be in the persistent level only. Because, again, just like with world partition, if this gets unloaded and reloaded, it's going to cause problems. So you want to make sure this is always loaded. And one last thing I want to show for the grid builder is this draw, debug, nav data. This is a little different than when it's drawing the navigation data as it's building it. That one's, when it's doing it as it's building it, that one's more simple. It doesn't show everything because it's so heavy. So this one is a bit more robust. I'm going to turn everything on. I don't really recommend using this very often or on any navigation areas that are very large, because it's just so heavy to show all this data. but I'll demonstrate it to you and catch my graphics card on fire. So I have it tied up to the K key, so press K, and you saw things pop in and then pop out. These stayed, which the lines you're seeing there, that's showing its relationships, its neighboring points. And this is a bug I've actually fixed for version 1.1. These weren't respecting the duration that was supplied. But that other data you saw had the actual nav point as well as the grid point that was associated with that nav point. So let me bring this down a little. Okay, so I've shrunk the nav mesh bounds volume down. It's a little bit more manageable when we show that debug data. And because there's no navigation generating outside of that box, those guys can't navigate because they have no points being generated nearby. So I'm going to press K. Now you can see all that data pop up, and I can make the duration longer. Let me do that. So I increased the duration to 20 seconds so you can get a better visual of what this is doing. And so there you can see little diamond shaped things are those are the grid points and then the nav points that get generated, and you can see the lines showing their neighboring points. You can't see the lines going from this one to that one because it's going through the box. See? And that's the last part for the grid builder. I hope this helped. If y'all have any questions at all, anything was confusing, please jump on my Discord server, ask questions. I'm happy to help. And thanks for watching. Subscribe if you want to get notifications when I post other tutorial videos or any video. And have a great one.